Hello and welcome to the tavern. Tonight's episode was sponsored by Mad World. Check them out at www.itsworldmadness.com. Go ahead and check out their app. And if you're looking for a little tavern merch, you can get the Tavern X Mad World hoodie crossover on sale now. As always, we're powered by StreamYard. Tonight, we have Reneau Peurifoy. He practices, well, he used to be a private practice in marriage and family therapy, specializing in anxiety disorders, before becoming a teacher at his local college. He's written 4 books, the most recent of which that was just released is Why You Feel the Way You Do. Tonight, we're here to talk about emotions and, well, why you feel the way you do. Reneau, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing good. It's good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you.
Mhm.
Landon, how are you tonight, sir?
Hey, we're just out here living the dream there, bud.
I see you are repping your local union hat today, not a crazy hat.
Yeah, local union hat and still in work clothes.
Oh.
Yay, me.
We got the best version of you, sir. So, Mr. Reneau, tell us a little bit about your book. Give us a little rundown.
Well, it starts off talking about what emotions are, why we have them, the core emotions that we share with our pets and other animals. Then it uses that as a foundation to talk about triggers and some of the core response patterns and how to change them. And then the last part is on positive psychology. What are the 3 basic things that make a person happy in life? And of course, at the end of each chapter, I've got a lot of recommended activities. So if people want to apply the material to, as they go along, they can do that, or they can just read it through for information, whichever they want to do.
Wonderful. I like that. So we've got a list of questions here for you. Number 1 being, what are the 7 core emotional systems that we share with our pets and other mammals? That right off the bat, I think, is interesting, that we share, core emotions with our pets.
Right.
Give us a breakdown on that.
Well, and up until the end of the last century, a lot of psychologists said, animals didn't have emotions. They're just all conditioned response little boxes. And of course, if you've been around animals or have pets, you knew that was just silly, right? They share a lot of stuff that we have. And when I started studying some of this, and a lot of this is neurobiology that's happened since about 2000 or so. There's a little bit started in the 90s, but a lot of it's really taken off in this century. One of the ones that I found to be really interesting is something called seeking. And if you look at any baby animal or, whether it's humans or cats or dogs or whatever, they have this desire to just go out and explore the environment. They just want to touch everything. They want to feel everything. Yep. And that's actually an emotional circuit, just like fear or anger. And it drives you, we call them affects, but it's a circuit that drives you to go out and explore the environment. You go to a new situation, like you sit down in a doctor's office or something, or wherever, the first thing you do is you check everything out. You're looking around, and that's just actually an urge inside of you, just like other emotions that we have. So I found that one to be interesting. And then one of the first ones that he identified, Panksepp, was the play circuit. And he was working with rats, and he found he could actually cut off all of the thinking part of their brain. They still wanted to play. And of course, you look at little kids, they want to do that too, right?
Yeah.
I've got a great granddaughter that we watch on Mondays and Tuesdays, and her favorite thing at 3.5 is tickle me, tickle me faster.
4-year-old. I'm well versed in that.
Wrestle, that type of stuff. So that, and as adults, we like to play too, right? It still has that urge, and what that does is it teaches us social limits, especially with kids, right? They learn what too much is by doing too much, and then you say, "Hey, that's enough of that." And then they through experience, they learn how to interact with other people. So all mammals have that social desire to play. We have, of course, the left circuit. Don't need to explain that one. That kicks in around puberty, right?
Right.
And then there's the 2 fear circuits, which are kind of interesting. One is danger, and the other one is commonly called separation anxiety. He calls it the panic circuit. But all babies, when they, the adult is leaves them, their mom or dad or whoever, they panic, right? They cry. And there's a complementary circuit to that called the caring circuit. And what that does is when, the parent hears that crying, that kicks up the old caring circuit, and they want to go take care of the kid. And again, that's also what causes us to be sad when people are gone. So as an adult, that translates into sadness. So when people are away or we lose somebody, we have that sadness. And also the caring circuit is what bonds us with other people. So, again, if things don't get dampened while we're growing up, because all these circuits get modified as we grow up. Some of them can be actually turned off depending upon the person's circumstances. And of course, there's anger, so we know all about anger, and that's again to protect ourselves, right? So
Yeah.
when you feel you're in danger, you either have fear or anger, depending upon how you assess the danger. If
The fight or
if the
flight.
danger is manageable, I'm going to become angry. I'm going to take care of it.
Yeah.
If it's unmanageable, I'm going to become frightened and run away. So if it's a little tiny dog, go away from me.
Yeah.
If it's a grizzly bear, it's like I go the other way, right?
Pretty much.
And of course, in daily life, like an interview or something like that, we sometimes have mixed emotions of whether it's going to be manageable or not. So we can fear anger, and you have anger and fear at the same time because these are separate circuits, and that's why sometimes we have mixed emotions in different situations. So that's the kind of the rundown, and those things are what drive us to actually do all the stuff that we do in the day.
That's what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that that one of those circuits was like the reason when a baby cries, you immediately want to go take care of it, right?
Right, the
So
caring circuit.
why, like for me, I noticed that circuit got very strong after I had my child. But even
Uh-huh.
now that she is, she's 4 years old, almost 5, she pretty much takes care of herself at this point. She's very Miss
Right.
Independent. But if I'm out in public and I hear another baby crying,
Oh yeah.
it gets me, man. Like I'm just like, yo, take care of your baby.
Yeah.
Somebody go stop it from crying. It needs something, And it's
Well,
not.
we were in Disneyland in Orlando, and
Uh-huh.
it was interesting watching a little kid. Some little kid would fall down, and immediately all the other little kids, the first that you could see that circuit kick into, they all become very concerned about what's going on. And of course, as
Yeah,
an adult, we have that also bonds us with our mate, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah, I always find myself, when a baby's crying, I start cooing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Little-
it's just, I don't know. It's just,
Well, I'll try not to cry during this time then. So I wouldn't want to embarrass you, right?
oh, that's okay.
the immediate trigger response. He starts cooing.
Yeah, being a dad though, now I just embarrass my 7-year-old. So
Right.
yeah, it's
It's the best part. Love embarrassing them. My favorite thing is when she's doing something annoying in public, I'll just turn around and I'll push my butt towards her and I'll start pushing her away and go, "Stop, you're embarrassing me." And I'll chase her around like that. She's like, "Dad, stop it."
Yeah. But again, she's learning social limits, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Little kids are interesting because they read you like a dog or a cat. They know your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your body language, posture. I mean, we all have that as adults. Some people are better at reading others than others. They're more empathetic. But it's interesting how little kids just can pick up all kinds of subtleties, just like your pets do.
Yeah.
And I might say too that on the negative side, when you're working in therapy, basically you have three things you deal with, right? You have threat, well, actually two things, threat and loss. With threat, it's either anger or fear, like I talked about before. And then with loss, it's going to be that sadness, that other circuit. And so when people are having problems with anger or fear, then you need to go back and figure out what's the threat. And if it's sadness, of course, there's a loss. So it's actually, emotions are pretty simple when you really start boiling them down, but we make them so complex. So
Very true. Can you talk a little bit about the process that generates emotions?
Well, actually, I've already kind of talked about that. Emotions drive us to meet our needs. In fact, in neurobiology, they talk about affects. Okay, affects are something that cause you to want to do something. So at the basic level, you have your sensory affects, like hot, cold, pain. And then the next level are your homeostatic affects. And those cause you to want to maintain a balance in your body. So hunger and thirst would be two examples of that. So
Okay.
when you're hungry or thirsty, you really want to get something to eat or you really want to drink something, right?
Yeah.
And then so
Right.
emotions are like the next level up, and they're there to meet different needs, like we already talked about. Social needs through the play, and the and also to explore your environment through the seeking, the bonding through the caring and the panic and the lust circuit. All those things bond people together. Then, of course, you have the anger and the fear to protect yourself against danger. So essentially, that's what emotions, how they work in people. I mean,
So
you see it very clearly in animals, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So-
people are the same way, except we get clever. We cover it up a lot.
Very true. People love to hide the way they feel about things. And I'm like, oh,
And also, different from animals, a threat to an animal is pretty concrete.
yeah.
With human beings, threats can take, and losses, it can be a loss of self-esteem, loss of my status. It can be, all kinds, my favorite car, whatever. So they take a more abstract kind of a form with people, but we still have that same reaction as if it's, a bear coming at us, or, we got a food in front of us or whatever. We still have the same kind of visceral effect inside of our body. The old fight or flight mechanism kicks in.
Exactly. Yeah, you mentioned how there were the two types of affects, and that makes kind of more sense to me now why some people, when they experience a very strong emotion or traumatic event, they turn to food and they kind of mix those two, and it somehow gets crossed, and that's how they deal with that emotion, is by indulging in food or other activities. That's
Well, I worked with anxiety disorders, was my big thing. And anxiety, like anger, it triggers the fight or flight response because, again, that's a threat. And so with the fight or flight response, all of the things that you don't need to run away or fight get turned off in your body, like digestion, that type of stuff. And so the opposite is the parasympathetic, which is your resting response. If you can activate that parasympathetic, it quiets down the fight or flight response. So that's one of the things that food can do. Is if you're really anxious, things don't settle right. But if you can shove a lot of food in your mouth, and that'll help to quiet down mild anxiety. So there's a physical basis for it.
Wow. See, I didn't know that.
Which would be the emotional trigger?
Well, the triggers have more to do with experiences. You have complex and simple ones. A simple trigger, like one of the examples I give in the book, is some people that were on an airplane and lightning struck it. And if you've ever been on an airplane where that happens, it's it really jars you. And so the next flight, the side of the airplane causes them to get anxious, right? So that's an emotional trigger based on some kind of a traumatic event. More complex ones would be somebody who's experienced a whole lot of abuse during the childhood, and now a lot of things will become an emotional trigger. Basically, at an unconscious level, they're picking up signs of danger. Most of the day, you're unconscious. When you think about just how you go through the day, you don't think about most of the stuff. Walking is probably a great example. When you walk down a hallway or down a street or something, you're not thinking about distance or your feet moving. You're thinking about, gee, when am I going to have to eat, or where am I going to go tonight? And all of those, just thousands of things that your body has to do in order to walk, are being taken care of by your unconscious. So in the same way, whenever you experience either a good thing or a bad things, one of the things that emotions do is there's an emotional tag, if you will, that gets placed on that memory. And so that's kind of how your brain sorts out important from unimportant. It's kind of an index system, if you understand computers. And so things that have emotional tags, whenever your brain or you notice it, that's subconscious in the environment, it'll trigger the appropriate emotion. And and that's why book learning is not as good as experience. Taking driving, I can read a whole lot of books about driving, understand all the concepts of driving, but until I get behind the wheel and start driving,
Not the same.
that's when, shouldn't do that, or hey, this is looking good. And so all of those now things that I'm experiencing get emotional tags, and so my subconscious uses that now to direct my unconscious behavior from that point on. And that's true for just about anything you do in life.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that would be something like if a child was in an abusive home that, I don't know, smelled like sage, the next time they smell sage as an adult, it may trigger that flight or fright.
Exactly.
Like, hey, that's where I was abused as a child. I don't like that scent, and it's emotionally tagged to that scent.
And sometimes there's not even a conscious awareness of it. You just know that I'm getting anxious. You might be at work, and maybe a coworker or the boss or somebody sounds like the abusive parent, right? And you may be getting anxious around them without even realizing, this is a nice guy. I don't understand why this person makes me so, on edge when I'm around them. And it's because there's something that reminds you from that experience in the past that's triggering an unconscious response.
Interesting. Landon, I know you don't normally get to do this. Would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah. Can you describe some habitual thinking patterns that generate negative emotions?
Well, there's a whole bunch of them. I think before we get into that, maybe we can talk about how you quiet some of these triggers. because that might be useful for
Okay,
people.
sure.
For simple triggers, it's just a simple. I use a technique called "What's happening, what's real." So, like in the case with a lightning strike, that's a fairly simple trigger, and so the person needs to do the self-talk. Okay, what's happening? This plane got struck by lightning. It really shook me up. Whoop, are you there? Oh, I know what's going on. Hello?
Yep,
Yeah, okay.
we can hear you.
My screensaver, I think, went on.
Ah,
Everything went black there for a second. But anyway, so what's happening is the plane got struck by lightning and I got shook up. What's real is I'm safe, and it's probably never going to happen in my life again. And then you use things to calm yourself, whether it's breathing techniques or you distract yourself with something else. And as you do that, now you desensitize to that reaction to the plane, because the lightning strike causes the sight of the plane, the sound of it, all that stuff to become marked as a danger. And essentially you have to go through a desensitization process, just like a fear of water or anything else. You have to get used to doing it, calming yourself down while you're doing it. In fact, one of the things that keeps a lot of phobias and going is the negative self-talk that people do. The other example I give in the book is the person who they starts thinking about the plane and starts saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. I'm never going to be able to get on a plane again." And the more they tell themselves those things, it strengthens that negative trigger. So triggers can either be strengthened or weakened by your self-talk. And so that's kind of the prelude to some of the distorted thinking we do. One of the big ones we do is should-must thinking. And this is not necessarily connected to triggers, just everybody does it to some extent. And that's the way things should or must or have to be, right? And the most common words are should, must, or have to, right? And I would tell clients who do a lot of that, there's nothing you have to do in life. And in fact, when I was teaching psychology, students would say, "Well, I have to come to school." I say, "No, stay home, relax." Well, but then I want to graduate. Yeah, I'll get a bad grade. I'd say, "Well, so you're choosing to go to school because you want the grade and you want to graduate." See, the bottom line is life is a series of choices. You do things because you're either getting good stuff or you're avoiding bad stuff. There's nothing you have to do. So one of the things I try to get people to do is change their language from not "I have to go to school," but "I choose to" or "I want to," something of that nature. Because that now puts you in the driver's seat. People who do a lot of should, must thinking, it's like there's this parent telling them you have to do all these things, right? And once you start using the language of choice, now you become the person who's in charge of deciding what you want to do. And it just gives you a different feel. I have to go to school feels different from, I'm choosing to go to school, and being clear why I'm making that choice. And there's a really interesting hidden form of this, which I call can't thinking. And a lot of times you'll see people, something will happen, they'll say, "I don't understand why that happened. It just doesn't make sense. Why would that happen?" And I call it circular why thinking, because the person kind of goes around in a circle and circle. And whenever I would see a client doing that, I'd say, "Okay, so why do you think that happened?" And they would give me a reasonably good explanation for why they thought it happened. Then they would immediately follow up and say, "But I don't understand." And
Oh
what's
God.
going on is they have a should must rule about the way life should be. So, for example, maybe a friend treated them unfairly, right? Well, gee, I thought that person was a good friend of mine. I don't understand why that happened. Gee, it just doesn't make sense to me. And so I'd say, "Well, do you have any ideas why that happened?" "Well, he's been going through a lot of stuff, and I know he had a stressful day that day, so maybe that happened. But I don't understand why." Well, in their world, they always get treated nice by their friend, right? That's the should must rule. I always treat people nice no matter what I do. Other people should treat me that way. And so they're not accepting reality. I used to tell my clients that I'm just a positive realist. Sometimes reality sucks, but you got to deal with it. Decide how you're going to react to it, rather than sit there and say, "Well, this shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening? How come, well, this happened." It's like accidents. You see that when an accident happens, right? Why did that happen? How could that happen? Because it was an accident, right? They happen.
Right. And how would we go about maybe putting our kids into that way of thinking? That would better help them in the long run, right?
Well, I think modeling it is the strongest thing, because kids are going to become. You've got kids, so they're sitting there sounding just like something you don't like about yourself, right? And you're thinking, "Don't do that," right?
Yeah.
Uh, So the more you can demonstrate, choosing, and when bad things happen, having that kind of realistic approach to it. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? As opposed, I don't understand why that happened. And when you see them doing that, talk to them about that. Well, okay, so why do you think that happened? Okay, yeah, so you actually do know, but yeah, we didn't want that to happen, did we? Yeah, that was a bad thing. But yeah, things like that do happen sometimes. So having those types of conversations, so that becomes kind of what they hear from you, and as you talk with them about things, it's what they can start to practice on their own. Again, start deciding that, yeah, you made a choice there. Yeah, that was a bad choice, wasn't it? That's why that probably happened. So
Right.
See, I have those kinds of conversations with my daughter all the time, and I have
yeah,
had people come by and be like, she's 4. She's too young to understand why you're asking her those things. It's like, no, it's never too early to try to teach her critical thinking and try to
yeah,
decipher why she
Yes.
did what she did or why there was a reaction. And my daughter now comes to me and when I say, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and she will say, and what happens if I don't?
yeah,
Because she wants to understand. And
yeah,
it's not that she's being disrespectful, but she's genuinely curious. If I do it, I know that daddy's going to be happy. But if I don't do it, what are the consequences of my actions so that she can decide whether or not she wants to do the activity
yeah.
or what I've asked her? And I think
Yeah.
that's a good sign for a 4-year-old.
And you're talking about something that when we talk about parenting that is so important, the logical and natural consequences, because parents do a lot of, what Dreikers used to call shooing flies, gee, I told you not to do that. How many times I got to tell? This is the 5th time I've told you not to do that. And unless you're willing to get up and take action, and the child knows that, they know you're not don't mean it. I had a friend of mine that taught. What was that? He was in 5th grade, right? And he had this student whose parent would come. And the student would just totally ignore the parent, keep on playing, and
Oh
finally the parent
man.
would get really angry and stomp their foot and say, "You come here right now." And so that student would come and they'd go. And so a couple days later, he asked the student, he says, "So why is it that you just ignore your parents so much?" He says, "Well, she doesn't mean it until she stomps her foot."
Oh,
Wow.
I thought that's probably one of the best examples I've ever heard.
that
Mhm.
is a great
Just like you watch
example.
the videos of a kid throwing a tantrum,
Yep.
and then the
Mhm.
parent goes in the next room, and so the kid follows him along. We used to have fun at the park. We'd watch the swings, right? And at some point, some kid fall off the swing, right? And you see him get up and just calmly look around for the parent, walk over to the parent, and then fall down and die, right? So yeah,
Just
the kids
because.
are fun. They're so transparent.
Oh, absolutely. Kids
Yeah,
are wonderful, and to see the way their little brains develop it's a beautiful thing. It really is. That they'll surprise you before you know it, and you'll be like, "Wow, when did
yeah,
you grow up so much?"
yeah,
They're little absorbent sponges, man.
yeah. Well
So,
worth it though.
oh, absolutely. Best thing I ever did was become a dad. Love
Yeah.
it. Um, what would you say is a forbidden emotion?
It varies from people, but it depends upon the person's belief system. So if I have to be strong, then weak emotions are forbidden.
Mm,
So you see this like at a funeral, right? The people who it's not okay to feel sad, and so they try to fix people up, right? Or they just
Mhm.
avoid it entirely, right? Um, I have a relative. I won't say who he is, but when I visit, when a tender moment comes on the TV, we start talking politics or cleaning those gutters, right? It's it's a level of feeling that it's intolerable because it's a weak feeling, and he's a very in control type of person, right?
yeah.
Um, so that's probably one of the most common one I would see is the weak feelings. You see that with, and the other thing, the nice thing about anger is it gives you adrenaline, and so you feel strong even though it doesn't do anything. So you're working on the car, got a part left over. Wife or kid comes out and says, "Hey, how's it doing, Dad?" I'm feeling inadequate and like I'm stupid. Getting angry makes me feel strong, right? So all those feelings go away. Uh, so yeah, so that's probably a very common one that you'll see. For some people, anger is not okay. If you grow up in a family where bad things happen to you, if you spoke up to your parents, you learn I better swallow all my anger. And so as an adult, a lot of times they'll afterwards something happens and say, I don't understand why I didn't speak up. I don't understand why I have such a hard time telling people what I want. And it's because of that, again, tradition, or that programming that they had, that if I speak up, bad things are going to happen. So at an unconscious level, they have what I call a core response pattern, that conflict is dangerous. So anytime they run into conflict, again, they placate. So, and that kind of takes us into this idea of core response patterns. We have all kinds of core
Right.
response patterns, because as you grow up, you learn, what's the world about, what are other people about, who's safe, who's not safe, what can I not do, and you develop all these unconscious response patterns related to that. One of the things that I found really useful with working with people is to label them. So if you put a label on it, it helps you identify when that response is going on. So now I can take some different actions, do some self-talk to kind of start to change those patterns, because they will change it over time if you become aware of them and you start changing them. The hardest thing with unconscious patterns is they're unconscious. So somehow you've got to become aware of when you're doing it. And once you become aware of it, then you can start to take some actions, and then things will start to change. So common negative ones would be, conflict is dangerous, the world is dangerous, I can't succeed. In the 60s and 70s, two core response patterns that were talked about a lot were learned helplessness was one of them. You take animals, you take a dog, and you give them electric shocks that they can't escape from, and pretty soon they give up trying. Now you can put them into another environment where they can easily escape, they won't even try. And so you see this in kids that have been beat down.
Wow.
You see this in societies where people come out, totalitarian societies and stuff, where they have no choices or power, and they act as if they're still in that society, even though they're in a place now where they have freedom and a lot of choices. So that's a common one. The other one that was really big back at that time was something called locus of control. You can either have an internal or an external locus of control. In other words, external means things just happen to me, I have no power. Internal is I have some control and power, I can influence things. So if I'm at work and I have an external locus of control and I get a raise or a promotion, well, it just happened, probably because nobody else was around to fill that spot. If it's an internal, then it's because I work hard. I show up and I prove that I'm worthy, and therefore that's why I got that. So those are really common things that you run into.
So it kind of reminds me, I used to have a friend who was sent to prison, and I met them through work. And even though I wasn't their manager at the time, they had a very, yes sir, right on it, I'm going to do it, kind of attitude, because they had been in such a controlled environment for so long. That's the only way they knew how to interact with people.
Right.
I'm like, I'm just your coworker. Just because I was told, hey, take leadership over this project, and you were on my team, doesn't mean that I'm your boss. You don't have to treat me like I'm the CEO of the company. But that's the only way they knew how to interact with people. Now that they were back in the non-prison environment. So it's interesting that people develop that, like you were talking about, where they're no longer in that country of origin,
right,
but yet they still feel like they're still being controlled, and it's interesting.
You see that, for example, in women who come out of a country where women are really second-class citizens, and they come over here and they might get into just a really controlled environment. In fact, maybe to kind of go beyond that, women who are being abused a lot or being in bad relationships, until they start to accept the fact that I deserve to be treated right, and I have the ability to do that. That's when things change, right? When they start to see that I have some rights, right?
Yeah,
I have right to be respected. I have the right to be not harmed.
yes.
Then they do something. That's the biggest problem in women's shelters and stuff a lot of times, is getting women to buy into the idea that I deserve it and I have the right to protect myself, because of that core response pattern.
So, Landon, I see we are past our time. Would you like to throw in your famous question?
Sure. So the question that we usually ask at the end of the show is, what is one question that you wish we would have asked you, and how would you have answered that question?
The question you would ask me, well, sure. How can they buy the book?
Wonderful. To the
There you
point.
go. That's a great
I love
question.
Yeah, so I think it's available on Amazon. There was a little bit delay in the printing, and the audio book just hit today, so it's an audio ebook and print. So if it's not, if it says that it's not available yet, it'll be there next within a week, if not like a few days. And you can also go to my website, whyemotions.com, right down, right down there at the bottom, right there,
Yep, yep, that's it.
whyemotions.com. Or I guess no, that's the book. That's the book name. Why? Oh yeah, it's going across the screen. And I've got YouTube videos on a lot of the stuff we've talked about. I've got some uh, free things that you can download, ranging from relaxation response to some pregnancy preparation and surgery prep, relaxation response, things like that. In fact, I used the pregnancy ones I used with my wife, and they were fun because the gynecologist said, does this stuff work? And so right after contraction, I hit her spot and I said, yeah, see, relax. And oh yeah, see, really relax. So speeds things up a lot.
There you
That's what I'm
go.
talking about.
Mm.
So, would you have any closing statements or words for our audience tonight?
Well, I think if you have some negative patterns going on in your life, the nice thing is you can change that. It's not magic. The brain is not a computer. You don't overwrite things. It takes time, but with the right approach, you can change all these negative patterns. They may come up when you're sick, hungry, and tired, but normally you can keep them fairly quiet. And so I think that's the good news is you're not stuck to stay where you're at forever.
Very true. Very true. I love that. One of my favorite songs has a lyric that says, "This may not be where I was born, but that doesn't mean it's not where I belong."
That's exactly right.
Landon, do you have any closing words for our audience tonight?
Mr. Reneau, I'll start with you. We really appreciate you coming on our show. We wish it was a little bit longer, but I can't wait to read your book. Okay, haven't gotten there yet, but I promise you that it is coming. Again, thank you for being on our show. To our audience, thank you guys for listening, taking the time out of your day to listen to two neurodivergents like us coming together and having a great time. Keep coming by. We love to have you here at the tavern. Like, subscribe, share. Love us. We love you. And be well.
Mr. Reneau, I also want to piggyback on that and just say thank you so much for being on the show with us tonight. It's wonderful to have a discussion with someone that understands, these emotions and anxieties, which is a big part of what we talk about on the show here. We have slowly but surely over the years gotten to become a very safe place to speak about these kinds of topics, and I hope that we, continue to do that for our audience. We've created what we call our tavern family here, and for those of you who have been listening for a long time, we love you. We appreciate you. As I always say, love you, mean it. Come back and hang out with us if you're having a bad day at work, if you're having a bad day at school, or whatever it is you're doing on your daily life and your emotional battery has hit zero. Go ahead and curl up in the bed, get yourself a snack, get yourself a drink, and come on to the tavern. We do our live episodes. You can also go back and listen to us on Anchor, Spotify, all the major places you find podcasts. But come join us live, man. We'd love to have you. Come, ask comments in the comment section here. Get to know the people that are actually on the show with us. We do this for you because we love you and we want to spend time with you. So if you're part of our tavern family, thanks for stopping by the tavern.